Hi, welcome to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the film series with lively discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach cinema studies at the College of Staten Island. Today we'll be seeing Howard Hawks' His Girl Friday, starring Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. This is a screwball comedy, indeed thought by many to be one of the finest of all American sound dialogue comedies. We'll be talking about it with two guests this evening. Those are Professor Ann Kaplan of Rutgers University and Professor Elliot Rubinstein of the College of Staten Island. Enjoy His Girl Friday.
Good American studies.
Hi, welcome back to Cinema Then, Cinema Now. I hope you enjoyed His Girl Friday. We have two guests today, and I'd like to take this moment to introduce them to you. First of all, we have Professor Ann Kaplan from Rutgers University. She's the director of the Film Studies program there. She's published a book a couple of years ago on women in film, both sides of the camera, several other books to her credit and articles. She works on film noir, on women in film in particular, and is now doing an interdisciplinary book on motherhood and representation. Over here, we have Professor Elliot Rubinstein, who is the coordinator of the Cinema Studies program at the College of Staten Island. Elliot's written variously on a variety of genres. He's a specialist in American film, published widely on American film comedy, including Your Film Guide to Keaton's The General. And, gee, there's all kinds of other things you do as well, but perhaps we won't keep the list that long. So what else do you want?
Well, I would like to mention that I'm one of the general editors of the
that
Rutgers
I knew there was
Films
something.
and Print
Yeah.
series.
No, Elliot is one of the general editors of the Rutgers in
Films in Print
series. And as a matter of fact, we seem to have had all those general editors on this show at one point, or
we get around.
We get around. You guys get around. Well, Ann, I'd like to start the discussion by asking you something about this film. It strikes most people who see the film that Rosalind Russell is really a startling and kind of wonderful character in this film. But her nature as a character has been a subject of some debate among feminist critics. Could you kind of lay out that territory for us? What's going on with that?
Well, what seems to have happened, Jerry, is that in the early days of feminist film criticism, and by that I'm talking of the late 60s, early 70s, those of us particularly who were bred on the 50s melodramas with their passive, sexy, and family-oriented heroines just leapt with delight on these so-called working career women from the 40s and 30s, and the stars we delighted in were Rosalind Russell, Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, and Bette Davis, Barbara Stanwyck also, and there were others. And people discussed them as sort of our feminist ideal. They were working, they were in professions, they were zipping about, they were zazzy in their conversation, and so forth. But what happened then was that we began to see there was some limitation to just saying, well, these are positive heroines and those are negative heroines. And we began to look a little more deeply into the structures of the films, the way the Hollywood codes are being used to present women. And I think this film is actually a rather good one to go into some depth with, just because, as you say, Rosalind Russell is usually seized upon as, well, wow, she really gives Cary Grant a hard time. Now, I mean, I think one of the things we could talk about is who indeed does control the discourse of this film. Is it indeed Rosalind Russell, or, as some others have argued, are they equal batting about? Some critics, and Molly Haskell's one of them, have argued that Rosalind Russell does a very nice mediation between the masculine, competitive, rather cruel, and the feminine, emotional and caring, in being herself in the workplace, committed and caring. I think there are problems with that analysis. First of all, it does essentialize woman. To use the notion womanliness is sort of like the 19th century, notion that we should, hierarchize women that way.
And it makes woman one particular thing. It makes her stable and nothing else with it. Okay.
That's right. Now, and I think if we look at the way the film's structured, Cary Grant is, obviously, it's quite obvious, controls the action. He is behind the scenes manipulating Rosalind Russell from the first moment. And Molly Haskell also talks about the film in terms of the choice between career and motherhood that the film offers. And I really question whether it does offer that choice, actually, because one way of looking at what Rosalind Russell is about in the film is indeed getting back to Cary Grant. That, in other words, the issues around career versus family, even the political issues of the film, around this political use of this prisoner, are all displaced into romance. That it's the bonding between the need to get Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell as a heterosexual couple that is the real underlying motive of the force of the film. And in that sense, that's not a very feminist ideal, if people agree that is what's going on in the film.
How does that fit in with what Hawks does in other films, Elliot? I mean,
In what way?
Well, what I'm thinking about is there's been discussion of the Hawksian woman. That is, in Hawks's films, there is a difference, not just in this film, but potentially in other films as well, in the way in which he represents women.
The woman finds herself and identifies herself ultimately as one of the boys, and thereby, in a sense, renounces some of the stereotyped attributes of womanhood. That is true in a great many Hawks films, and it is true even in those films in which the woman is to some extent glamorized in a way that Rosalind Russell is not in His Girl Friday. For example, in the Bacall films, the woman is allowed to have a more she doesn't wear business suits and...
so we're thinking of To Have and To Have Not, The Big Sleep,
You see, I think arguably one could say that in this film, it fits in with what Elliot's saying in a way. Rosalind Russell is made into a non-female. That this is another camaraderie
How's that done?
film. Well, it's done, first of all, as you were just talking about the suits, which was my association, the very square kinds of clothing, the non-sexual appeal. Now, of course, that is characteristic of Rosalind Russell across a lot of her films. She doesn't play to the male desire, and one could see that in a way as subversive, but looking at it in terms of Hawks's problems, possible misogyny in relation to women, one could say he finds the feminine so threatening that what he needs to do with it is to get her back actually into a male character. Then she can be in the male workplace and being a camaraderie with the males, which is the highest, arguably, the highest, I don't know if Elliot would agree, the highest emotion in Hawks's repertoire is male camaraderie. So he takes her from the feminine. So it's ambiguous whether that's progressive or not.
Yes, and also one of the things that Hawks ignores in relation to both the temptations that befall Rosalind Russell in this film, that is to say the temptation to domesticity with Ralph Bellamy and the temptation to the newspaper world with Cary Grant, one of the things he ignores completely is sexuality. There is no suggestion in either case of romance in any kind of conventional accepted sense of the word.
There's almost the the boys' night out syndrome. Even when she's telling the story, or he's telling the story, and even when they're telling the story of when the governor walked into their suite, it's as if it's not really that much of a sexual joke. I mean, they think that Ralph Bellamy might think of it that way, but they don't even think of it that way.
And in fact, when they are doomed to go to Albany at the end, there is an extraordinary line that Cary Grant delivers about whether Ralph Bellamy, who lives in Albany, will put them up, which suggests some extraordinary chasteness about the whole relationship.
And there is this extraordinary treatment of that other woman in the film, Molly. Molly, exactly, are extremely negatively treated, I would say. Molly, of course, ends up, as you know, jumping out of the window, and the narrative doesn't stop one moment to find out what happened to her. Doesn't care at all. She just zooms out the window.
She's still alive, one of the reporters says.
That's all we know about
That's all
her.
we know. And then the mother, so caricatured, so ridiculed. I mean, actually, in feminist terms, I mean, this is actually sort of occurring to me now, there is a very interesting negative look at the nuclear family. I mean, one of the problems with Haskell's analysis is that it doesn't deal with the problem of the nuclear family. It's not enough to talk about womanliness. It's not enough to sort of say that woman's, priority is emotional terrain. The problem for women has been the repressiveness of the nuclear family. And in a certain sense, this film is very hard on the nuclear family. But again, I see that as Hawks's male problem with the family rather than thinking in terms of how this constrains women. Hawks's males, by and large, don't want to be confined in that narrow circumference. And woman is an enemy for Hawks often because she's the one who wants to pull the man back into this unattractive, right? Am I?
Yes, and I think that there's another aspect to all of this, to any discussion of this as a feminist film, or to any discussion of this as a comedy, as an isolated instance of filmmaking, and that is that Hawks draws very heavily on highly conventionalized figures of classical comedy. The mother is not only a mother in a particular feminist or non-feminist discourse, but she is the traditional ample-bosomed dowager of many a stage comedy. Her connections with, say, Margaret Dumont in the Marx Brothers films is it's certainly not exact resemblance, but the connection is there. Similarly, Ralph Bellamy assumes many of the functions of the Senex figure, the old man. I mean, he's of classical comedy, the pompous old and weak and asexual old man, so that Russell's decision to marry him is implausible from the beginning. And many of the other figures in the film also partake in the same way, that at the same time that they partake in this new genre of comedy, they have very clear roots in older and much more conventional forms of comedy, all of which complicates.
Yes, it does come. I think Rosalind Russell's, the film she made in 1932 with a female director, Dorothy Arzner, Craig's wife, often seen as the flip side of His Girl Friday, since here indeed we have totally the woman confined to the home. It actually arguably represents a more subversive image than does Hildy, who is out there in the workplace in the way we've described. Because there, what Arzner does is to take this figure of the perfect housewife mother figure, she's not yet a mother in this particular instance, and push her to an extreme where all the constraints, all the impossibilities and vulnerabilities and problems with the woman confined to the middle class, upper middle class family home are kind of exposed. I mean, some of the feminist theorists have talked about sort of the way the film is cracked open by that kind of pushing to an extreme where this figure we at once empathize with us, and so vulnerabilities are demonstrated to us, but also see what the choices are for a woman like that, just impossible.
That film brings up two issues related to this one for me. I mean, one of them is the issue of what we're going to call the classical Hollywood style. And the fact that Arzner's working, she may be a female director, but she's working within that stylistic system. So how subversive can she be within that system? And the second thing is 1932, it's a pre-code film.
That's right.
So there's a whole set of, there are ways in which issues can presumably be addressed then, that they can't they may be able to be addressed, but they can't be addressed in the same manner later. I mean, this classical Hollywood style, I mean, what ways does Hawks's film, let's just talk about what that style is and the ways in which Hawks embodies that.
Well, the style has many aspects. I suppose the first thing you would have to say about it is that it is preeminently a style that conceals a style. The ideal was simply not to reveal the workings of the film, the processes of production, to make the editing, for example, as invisible as possible, to cut always, for example, or whenever possible, on movement, to make clear always an eye-line contact between the principal characters and so on. Everything that we have come to assume as normal in movies was, of course, very conventionalized and very carefully worked out and very carefully perfected, especially during the 30s. It is hard to, I think it is hard to say that style and content can ever be dissociated in such a way that a film made within that very limited and very narrow, not that it didn't produce wonderful films, but that very limited and narrow system could be as revolutionary as some people want to make a film like His Girl Friday. I mean, it seems to me it's not only the thematics of it, but the very style of classical Hollywood production that militates against a kind of full feminist statement.
Well, that brings us back to Arzner. I mean, what's Arzner up to? I mean, our viewers haven't seen Craig's wife, but still, it's interesting what arguments have been made about how she cracks that system as well, or how.
Well, it is a debate. Let me say that also some people argue that indeed Arzner is not doing anything that's non-patriarchal, that she adheres to the patriarchal feminine. The biggest discussion has been about her Christopher Strong film, which where she has a very career-oriented heroine, Kate Hepburn, who is a flyer, but who the workings of the film make her end up committing suicide. She wants to continue her career, she wants to remain a flyer, but the man does not want her to, and there is this incredible tension in the film. Now, Dorothy Arzner herself, when interviewed, has said, well, of course she had to commit suicide. I mean, that was the only thing to do if she was going to, if, you know, the family was going to be continued. So we don't try to attribute, I think, to Arzner herself any particularly feminist politics. She was a woman filmmaker working within the codes and the constraints of Hollywood. But what we can argue is that sort of, not unbeknownst to her, but in a certain sense within the way she structures her films, there are strong identifications with the plight of the patriarchal feminine, and that she is able to, she sympathizes with the plight. She's very aware on some level.
So she gives some authority to the discourse of the feminine.
That's right, she does, arguably. It does give some discourse, make them subjects, and while not sort of making a revolutionary gesture and turning over the whole patriarchal language, she does expose some of the ways it works, arguably, such as exposing the dilemma for a woman who is supposed to want marriage and family in a situation where her whole drive and own desire is towards achievement in the public sphere, to sort of make us see that conflict. But what Elliot says about the system is true. One has to go to avant-garde strategies, to alternate
someone
cinema.
like Maya Deren, who's working outside of the Hollywood system at this point. But we can. I still think we can talk about the subversive qualities of His Girl Friday. If I don't think we've in any sense neglected the feminist issue, but there are ways in which comedy can itself traditionally be a subversive genre, and certainly there's a whole set of ways in which this film is trying to puncture certain targets in American society. It's an extraordinarily patriotic film about the strength of American character. I mean, Walter Burns is the kind of person who, you know, is almost like a founding father. I mean, he knows how to get things right for America. And no, he also steps outside of the bounds of certain normal authority, because he is a kind of higher authority as a schemer. Let's come back to this issue of the code, because when the code goes into place in the in 1934, how you can address certain issues changes. Not to say that certain issues just drop out for a while, but this film has a lot going on in it.
For example, I'm not sure what aspect of the code you're thinking of.
First of all, I'm thinking about even apart from the issue of the strength of Hildy as a feminine character, there's a great deal about sexuality in urban environments that permeates this film. I'm thinking I'm thinking, for example, of the fact that we have the one reporter who spends a great deal of time looking up the stairwells so he can see up women's skirts as they walk by. Hildy talks to Roy, the reporter from the Tribune, and makes it very clear that she thinks he's gay and that he's manipulated by people as a consequence of that. I mean, Molly Malloy is a woman of the street, and her her nature, what she's doing out there on the street. They can't exactly call her, a prostitute, but still, it remains ambiguous what's going on there.
I think that, although certainly this has a great deal to do with the code, anything in Hollywood film of that period must necessarily have a great deal to do with the code. Don't you think that's more Hawks than code? That's Hawks's, looking up gratings into ladies' skirts and the constant jokes about the backside, the fell on her piazza,
refers to other films,
shot in the classified ads, and the one with the wart on her fanny, and all the repeated jokes about the human derriere. They tend to be sort of adolescent and pre-sexual jokes.
No, very much boys, and helps define exactly who these fellows are and how they're incapable of understanding certain aspects of the thing they're reporting on. Because we think again of Hildy's great line, "Gentlemen of the press," after Molly, and it's one of those moments in which we have one of the few stops in the pace. It's not that long. They don't stop to mourn Molly for more than 5 seconds or whatever, but still in a film of this speed, and it's really quite extraordinary that you have a halt to the action in that way. Well, I'm also thinking of its view of American politics. I mean, this is a very corrupt city they're dealing in, and comically corrupt to be sure, but.
Yeah, corrupt in conventional ways. I mean, do you think they're trying to say that this city at this time is different from all big cities at all times?
Oh no, I think the film is quite. I think it's quite ahistorical. That is, that it's really dealing in a myth of what American urban life is like, and this conflict between.
Part of that myth is the corruption of government.
Exactly. And the back room humor of the boys.
Exactly. And so and of course it fits in with the classical patterns of comedy you're talking about, because the corrupt people are elderly. I mean, they're defined as inept and older, and the vibrant new generation represented by Walter and Hildy are the people who are supposed to take the reins, and take over. Except they're not really ready for exactly that,
They want to be on the sideline, destroying the government as it is. They don't seem to have any particular pressure to enter the government.
Well, no, see, that's what I think is interesting. It mythologizes this particular moment of conflict, because it's not as if we get at the end of this the kind of sense of transference of power that you get in a lot of comedies, where one generation is expelled and the new generation takes over. This emphasizes that sense of conflict between. I agree with you completely that what they want to do is they want to be there. They want to be there beating these guys constantly.
Yeah, and that's part of the mythology of the newspaper reporter, the newspaper editor, whose job is not to function in the public sphere as public officials, but rather as perpetual critics. I mean, their job is constantly to call down the government.
Right.
They almost never seem to have anything very constructive to offer, but they're always calling down. There's a vague reference to LaGuardia in New York, but on the whole, the function in the newspaper comedy is to call down governments and to challenge the principles on which these governments are
But what's
erected.
interesting, while they're calling it down, this kind of brings us full circle in some ways. It's that it's a charge against patriarchy brought from within inside patriarchy.
That's right. And that's what I would say in terms of the female role. There's one thing I wanted to add, which is very interesting about the newspaper story Hildy is trying to write. It never gets written. I mean, the whole ploy is that she is this whiz-bang, his best reporter, and she tries to write the story, and for one reason or another, the actual processes never get completed. So her sort of story is written out in the interest of making sure that there's a right kind of coupling with Cary Grant, which is very much that she's in her boss reporter position. And I think that stresses what I was saying before about the effort of the film to sort of couple these two. And yes, indeed, during the course of the film, as the sort of first wave of feminist critics pointed out, we are able to delight in her pugnacious sort of battle
yes. Oh, yes.
to resist.
Their first encounter in his office, in which he's, yes.
Just what we were saying, that it goes so fast that one can hardly catch the actual tremendously witty lines that go back and forth on both sides. I mean, it's a real sparring match, but I still think that when one looks at the film a second time, you are aware that actually perhaps Hilda's whole move to marry Bellamy is already a strategy to get Cary Grant back. I mean,
he's so inappropriate.
Yes, and why does she bring him to the office if not to humiliate him? I mean, there is no logical reason for her to bring him to the office. Well, in fact, I can't even figure out any particular reason why she goes to the office herself.
Just to tell him that she's definitely leaving.
Well, telephones had been invented. If any film proves it, it's this
occasionally in the film.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
But I mean, partly it's a dramatic ploy, but also one must think of other reverberations. She obviously wants to be there in order to inaugurate a kind of subversion of her own plan.
Yes,
and she does it most effectively by bringing Ralph Bellamy, who is confused first with a very old man and second with an umbrella.
Yes. And third, I would say, with the feminine. I mean, he is a kind of so passive, so kindly, kind of very feminized male. I mean, one of the things that's a problem with feminist criticism is that, I mean, what we have to really understand is that the rigid gender categories, masculine, feminine, are so inescapable that one can hardly talk outside that framework. So that I want to say something about Ralph Bellamy and certain characteristics, and how do I find a word to describe it except the feminine, and then the masculinizing of Rosalind Russell. So the problem with this whole discourse reveals the problems that we're in, which is that gender categories are so polarized and so fixed that film discourse has to use them and play with them, and really the only way to rework them is to deconstruct them. I mean, to have films which simply show us
what those mechanisms are, and how historical these things that we take to be essential and ahistorical are.
And that socially constructed, how socially constructed these roles are.
Well, and certainly if you were trying to make, which I think no one has ever accused him of doing, if you were trying consciously to make some kind of feminist point, or any kind of philosophical point at all, he would have almost necessarily had to have cut down on the speed. I mean, it's almost impossible to think of a serious social point being made at that kind of breakneck speed. And the speed is, more than anything else, I think, what determines the effect, the feel of the movie.
It also is one of the things that affects our judgment of characters. I mean, one of the things we admire about these characters, I think, insofar as we admire them, is that they continue at this speed, at this pace, and they kind of embody this new American notion of this is the American city, this is the American newspaper man, and she's accommodated. She's accommodated to that. And if you want to be truly modern, you must live with these rhythms and these ways.
To which I would add, also the new American film.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's not something that the film points to outside itself. Well, I mean, is that? But it also points to the internal styles of the stylistics of Hollywood films of the time, the screwball comedy, as it is known, if you want to think of it as a genre or not. The characteristic stylistic trait of the screwball comedy is speed, and the overlapping of voices, a kind of new verbal music that was created out of vaudeville and transported into Hollywood in the 30s.
You know, that also brings up the issue, the speed of the language.
Yes, and that does not lend itself to solemn proclamations on any social or political subject.
But also it's a new development in a kind of comedy, because, for film at least, because it's not based upon, shall we say, an English classical theatrical tradition of what dialogue is, how it's to be used. But I mean, this is a sort of dialogue that percolates up from the streets in some way and is distinctly an American form of English, and defines an American form of modernity and irreverence, of smartness of its own kind, not something that descends from above through universities, but comes from the College of Hard Knocks and all that.
And also that almost precludes serious or conclusive conversations.
It does raise a very interesting question. There is a book to be written, and maybe some people out there are writing it, on a feminist approach, to comedy. There are only too few books on comedy in general in film. But I wonder whether that that what you're saying about in general American comedy doesn't account for why the feminine is not critiqued more in the American screwball comedy. I mean, I'm sure if we look at across the genres, the comedy would be a one to find breaks and critiques and self-reflexivity on the rigid categorizing of male and female. But perhaps because it took this form, that traditional has been in classical comedy was a critique. Maybe that's one of the reasons that American comedy has not provided really a place for an extensive kind of social comment, because of this new tradition, as it were, of speed. And
yeah, it's interesting. As late a film as I think about 5 years ago, Robert Zemeckis made a film called Used Cars, which is modeled upon His Girl Friday and the screwball comedy. Its setting is used car lots, and interestingly enough, the last shots of that film is when the daughter, who's been brought into the family, assumes a role of being equally manipulative as a car salesman as the male characters whom she's come to admire. So it's 35 or 40 years later, and yet we're seeing the same structure of she becomes one of the boys in doing so, and in fact she manages to, I believe the last shots are a little old lady asks her if this is actually a taxi cab she's buying because it's yellow. She says, no, that's base paint, my friend, base paint. So really you're getting and you see that she's successful, but she's successful because she's learned how to use the patriarchy, not to step outside.
One could say that's the lesson of our very period, and our moment in feminism is that we have maybe learned to use the patriarchy, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is that really a challenge to it?
Other domains for that. Well, I tell you what, we have just run out of time, and I think that's a fairly good place for us to stop it with the question. So where do we go from here? Okay. Well, if you are interested in hearing more about this film series or about cinema studies, both undergraduate and graduate at the College of Staten Island, please send us a self-addressed stamped envelope. You should send it to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, New York, 10301. Let me give you that address again, okay? That's Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, New York, 10301. Well, I certainly hope that our discussion here leads you to thought and discussion at home that you enjoy. Join us again. Thank you. Well.